My parents didn't scream or hit me. They did something quieter and somehow worse. They blamed me. Every time something went wrong, their eyes drifted toward me, like the answer was obvious. A missed promotion, a broken car, a bill they couldn't pay. Well, my mother would sigh. You know, Olivia brings bad luck. She said it the way people say the weather forecast. Calm, certain, final. At first, it was a joke, then it became a rule. By the time I was 10, I believed it. I walked softly, spoke carefully, apologized for things I hadn't done, terrified that my existence alone might ruin another day. My older brother was their pride. I was their explanation. So, when I packed 2 suitcases at 18 and walked out without a fight, they didn't stop me. They just waited. They were sure I'd fail. Sure, I'd come crawling back. What they didn't expect was this. When I left, I didn't take their problems with me. I took all my luck. I grew up in a house where silence felt heavier than noise. It wasn't the kind of home where people slammed doors or shouted across rooms. It was worse than that. Everything was said calmly, carefully, like the words had been rehearsed long before they reached me. My parents believed in patterns. They loved connecting dots, even when the dots didn't belong together. And at some point, long before I was old enough to understand, they decided I was the missing piece that explained everything that went wrong. My brother Ethan was born first. He was their miracle. The kind of child adults liked immediately. He smiled easily, spoke confidently, and somehow always seemed to be in the right place at the right time. Teachers praised him. Coaches fought over him. My parents talked about him like he was proof that they had done something right. Then there was me. I came 3 years later, quieter and more cautious, like I already knew the room wasn't built for me. According to my parents, that timing mattered. They liked to say things like, life was good back then, or before everything started going downhill. They didn't need to say my name. It hovered in the air anyway. When my dad lost his job, I remember sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, my feet barely touching the floor. My mother stood by the sink, staring out the window, her voice soft but sharp at the edges. Ever since Olivia was born, she said, nothing ever stays stable. She didn't look at me when she said it. That somehow made it worse. When the car broke down a year later, my father sighed loudly and rubbed his temples. This family just can't catch a break, he muttered. Then his eyes flicked toward me. Too much bad energy, like I was something leaking into the walls. At first, it was framed as humor. My mom would laugh and call me her little storm cloud. Relatives would chuckle awkwardly at family gatherings when she said it. I learned to smile on cue, even when I didn't understand why everyone thought it was funny. But jokes don't stay jokes when they're repeated often enough. By the time I was 8, the laughter had disappeared. The words stayed. If a bill was higher than expected, it was because I used too much electricity. If a glass shattered, it was because I'd been in the room earlier. If my parents argued, it was because I changed the mood. They never told me directly that I was unwanted. They didn't have to. I learned how to move through the house quietly, like I was afraid of setting something off. I learned to read my parents' expressions before I spoke. I learned that apologizing even when I didn't know what I'd done was the fastest way to end a conversation. Sorry became my favorite word. Ethan noticed the pattern before I did. He started calling me Jinx sometime in middle school. The first time he said it, he laughed like it was harmless. Relax, Olivia. It's just a nickname. My parents didn't stop him. Sometimes my dad even smiled. That's when I understood that this wasn't something I'd grow out of. It was a role, one they'd written for me before I could read. At school, I tried to be invisible. At home, I tried to be useful. I cleaned without being asked. I stayed out of the way. I told myself that if I took up less space, maybe the damage would stop. It never did. By the time I was 10, I believed them. I believed there was something wrong with me, something broken or cursed or defective that I couldn't see but everyone else could feel. I stopped wishing for things. Wanting felt dangerous. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet fear settled in and made itself comfortable. If I really was the reason everything went wrong, then one day, I'd have to leave. Not because I wanted to, but because staying would only make things worse. By the time I turned 16, I was tired of being a problem no one could solve. I decided that if I couldn't change who I was, I could at least change what I cost them. That's how I ended up working evenings at a small grocery store 3 blocks from our house. I told my parents it was for experience, but the truth was simpler. I didn't want them to say I owed them anything. The first night I came home with my uniform smelling like bleach and old produce, my mother looked me up and down. "Well," she said, "at least you're finally doing something useful." I nodded like that made sense. From that point on, I paid for my own clothes, my own notebooks, my own lunches. When I needed something for school, I didn't ask, I figured it out. Independence became my apology for existing. At school, I studied like my life depended on it. Maybe it did. I stayed up late, rereading textbooks until the words blurred together. I told myself that good grades might cancel out bad luck, like numbers on opposite sides of an equation. Ethan never had to try that hard. When he brought home a B, my parents said, "That's okay. You can't be perfect all the time." When I brought home an A-, my mom frowned. "What happened?" she asked. "I thought you'd be more careful." Careful? As if failure was a moral flaw. Ethan got rides to practice. I walked home from work. Ethan had weekends free. I covered extra shifts. Whenever relatives came over, my parents showed off Ethan's accomplishments like trophies. "He's going places," my dad would say proudly. Then they'd turn to me. "Olivia works a lot," my mom added. "She has to." I learned to keep my head down and my expectations low. Still, hope is a stubborn thing. During my senior year, I applied to college in secret. I filled out forms at night, double-checking every line because I couldn't afford mistakes. When the acceptance email came with a partial scholarship attached, I stared at the screen for 10 full minutes before I dared to believe it. I finally told my parents at dinner. "I got into Ohio State," I said quietly, "and they offered me a scholarship." The table went silent. Ethan looked up first. "Seriously?" he said. "That's actually impressive." For a split second, my chest felt light. Then my dad cleared his throat. "Scholarships can disappear," he said. "Don't count on it." My mom nodded. "College is expensive," she added. "And when things fall apart, they fall apart fast for you." I waited for them to say they were proud. They didn't. Instead, my dad leaned back in his chair and said, "Community college might be a safer option. Less risk, less embarrassment if it doesn't work out." Embarrassment. That word followed me to my room that night and sat beside me while I packed a box of things I might need someday. Not to leave yet, but to remind myself that there was an outside. Ethan left for college the following year. My parents threw him a party. Balloons, cake, photos for social media. When I left a year later, there was no party. My mom stood in the hallway while I zipped my suitcase. "You can call us when you need to come home," she said, not unkindly, just certain. "We'll be here." She didn't say if, she said when. I hugged her anyway, because that's what daughters are supposed to do. As the car pulled away, I watched our house shrink in the distance and felt something unfamiliar rise in my chest. Not relief, fear. What if they were right? What if everything I touched really did fall apart once I was on my own? I didn't know it yet, but that fear would follow me to campus, sit beside me in lecture halls, whisper to me before exams, remind me that I was only ever one mistake away from proving them right. But I went anyway. Because staying would have meant accepting their story as the truth. And some small, stubborn part of me wasn't ready to do that yet. Leaving home didn't feel like freedom. It felt like walking into open water without knowing how to swim. The first night in my dorm, I lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds, doors opening, people laughing down the hall, someone's music playing too loudly through thin walls. Every noise made my chest tighten. My parents' voices followed me there, whispering warnings I couldn't shut off. "Don't get comfortable. This won't last. You always ruin things." I failed my first calculus quiz 2 weeks into the semester. When I saw the grade, my hands went cold. My heart pounded like I'd committed some irreversible crime. I sat on my bed staring at the paper, already rehearsing the phone call home I was sure I'd have to make. I didn't call. Instead, my roommate Maya glanced at the paper and shrugged. "That class is brutal," she said. "Most people bomb the first quiz. We'll figure it out." I waited for disappointment. For blame. For that familiar look that said, "This is why nothing works out for you." It never came. That moment stayed with me longer than the grade itself. College was hard, but it was hard in a way that made sense. If I struggled, It was because I hadn't studied enough or the material was difficult, not because the universe had decided to punish me for existing. I worked mornings at the campus cafe to cover what my scholarship didn't. The hours were early, and my feet ached, but the money felt different from the paycheck back home. It wasn't proof that I was making up for something. It was simply mine. When I got tired, no one told me it was because I carried bad energy. When I made mistakes, no one treated them like moral failures. Slowly, almost without noticing, I started to breathe differently. I joined a student architecture club on a whim, even though I'd never told my parents I was interested in design. They always said creative careers were risky, especially for someone like me. But in that room, surrounded by drafting tables and half-finished models, I felt focused in a way I never had before. Time passed without me checking the clock. For the first time, effort felt rewarding instead of desperate. During winter break, I went home. The house looked exactly the same, but I didn't. At dinner, my dad asked, "So, how long before you realize this isn't working?" "I'm doing fine," I said carefully. My mom smiled in that tight way she had. "Give it time." Ethan barely looked up from his phone. When I left again, I felt the old fear creep back in, but it didn't stay. Back at school, I failed another exam. I passed the next one. I learned to ask for help without apologizing. I learned that struggling didn't mean I was doomed. By senior year, something had shifted. I stopped waiting for the moment everything would collapse. I graduated with honors. My parents attended the ceremony, clapping politely like they were watching a stranger's achievement. My mom hugged me afterward and whispered, "I'm surprised you made it this far." I smiled for the photo. 2 weeks later, I packed my life into my car and drove 4 hours away for a job at a mid-sized architecture firm in Chicago. The city overwhelmed me at first, the noise, the speed, the constant sense that everyone else knew what they were doing. My apartment was small, my paycheck modest, and my confidence shaky, but I showed up every day. I learned names, I asked questions, I stayed late when I needed to. When I made mistakes, my supervisor corrected me and moved on. No one said, "Of course this happened to you." 5 years passed faster than I expected. I moved from junior associate to project coordinator. I saved enough to buy a small condo. I adopted a cat who followed me from room to room like she was making sure I didn't disappear. I dated. I laughed. I built routines, and nothing fell apart. Meanwhile, things back home didn't improve. My dad lost another job. My mom's health problems got worse because she avoided doctors. Ethan dropped out of college and moved back into his old room. Whenever my mom called once a year, usually on my birthday, she sounded disappointed that I was still standing. "Just checking in," she'd say. "Seeing how you're holding up." I stopped correcting her, because by then, I knew the truth even if I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. My life wasn't working despite me. It was working because I had finally stepped out of the story they wrote and started living my own. And that's when the phone rang. The phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing blueprints at my desk. I almost ignored it. Unknown number, probably spam. But something made me pick up. "Olivia," my father said. "No, hello. No pause. We need to talk." His voice sounded older, rougher. But the tone was the same, like he was about to assign me a task I couldn't refuse. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "What's wrong?" I asked. "It's Ethan," he said. "He needs surgery." The word surgery landed heavy in my chest. "What kind of surgery?" I asked, already opening a blank document on my computer. Instinctively preparing to take notes like this was a problem I was expected to solve. "It doesn't matter," he replied. "What matters is the cost." There it was. "We don't have the money," my mother's voice cut in from the background. I hadn't realized she was on the line too. "And you're doing well now, so it makes sense for you to help." I waited for something else. An apology. A question about my life. Anything that sounded like concern. Nothing came. "How much?" I asked quietly. There was a brief pause, like they were checking their math. 15,000, my father said. "We need it soon." The office around me blurred. I could hear my coworkers laughing somewhere down the hall, completely unaware that time had just folded in on itself. "You haven't called me in 3 years, I said. "And this is the first thing you say?" My mother sighed, impatient. "This isn't about the past, Olivia. This is about family." Family. That word used to mean obligation, fear, guilt. We raised you, my father added. The least you can do is help when your brother needs you. I closed my eyes. A familiar pressure wrapped around my chest, tight and suffocating, the same feeling I used to get as a kid when I knew I was about to be blamed for something I couldn't fix. I need time, I said. You don't have time, my mother snapped. Hospitals don't wait. Don't out of it. I pictured Ethan lying in a hospital bed, pale and scared, and the image twisted something inside me. I wasn't heartless. I didn't want him to suffer, but I also heard another voice, quieter, steadier. Why is this on you? I'll call you back, I said, and hung up before they could answer. I sat there for a long time, my hands shaking slightly above the keyboard. $15,000. The number replayed in my head like a chant. It wasn't impossible. I had savings. I could make it work. But the cost wasn't just financial. That night, I didn't go home right away. I walked the long way through the city, letting the noise drown out my thoughts. Every step felt like I was walking backward through my own history. I remembered my mom blaming me for my dad's stress. My dad saying I made things harder just by being around. Ethan calling me jinx and laughing. By the time I unlocked my door, my chest ached. My boyfriend Daniel looked up from the couch when I came in. You're late, he said gently. Then he saw my face. Hey, what happened? I sat down beside him and stared at my hands. They called, I said. My parents? His jaw tightened. He didn't interrupt. They need money, I continued. For Ethan's surgery. Daniel stayed quiet, letting me talk. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't even say hello, I said, my voice flat. They just told me what they needed, like I owed them. How do you feel? He asked. The question caught me off guard. I don't know, I admitted. Angry, guilty, scared, all at once. I leaned back against the couch, suddenly exhausted. Part of me thinks I should just pay it, I said. Just make it go away. And the other part? Daniel asked. I swallowed. The other part knows that if I do, nothing will change. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying the call, searching for some version of it where they sounded different, where they cared. In the morning, I called my therapist, Dr. Karen Miller, and left a message asking for the earliest appointment she had. By the time I hung up, my hands were trembling. The old patterns were waking up. I could feel them crawling back into place, whispering familiar lies. Good daughters don't say no. Family comes first. You owe them. I hated how convincing those voices still sounded. But for the first time, I didn't immediately obey them. Instead, I opened my laptop and started researching Ethan's condition myself. If I was going to help, I needed to understand what I was actually being asked to sacrifice. And deep down, a question I'd never allowed myself to ask finally surfaced. What if helping didn't have to mean giving them control again? Dr. Karen Miller's office smelled faintly of tea and old books, the same way it always had. I sat down in the familiar chair, hands clasped together so tightly my fingers ached. I got a call from my parents, I said, barely taking a breath. She waited. She always did. They need money, I continued. My brother needs surgery. They want $15,000. Dr. Miller nodded slowly. And how did they ask? And I hesitated. They didn't. They told me. The words hung in the air, heavier than I expected. She leaned forward slightly. What did they say about you? I thought back to the call. The lack of questions. The way my life hadn't even registered as relevant. They didn't ask how I was, I said quietly. They didn't say they were sorry. They just assumed I would fix it. Dr. Miller tapped her pen against her notebook. That sounds familiar. It was. Painfully familiar. I told her everything, the guilt, the fear, the urge to just give them what they wanted so the pressure would stop. I keep thinking that if I say no, I admitted, I'll be proving them right. That I really am selfish. That I really don't care about my family. She tilted her head. Olivia, what does help mean to you? I don't know, I said honestly, making sure my brother doesn't suffer. And what does control look like in your family? She asked. The answer came too quickly. Money, I said. Obligation, keeping score, she nodded. So the real question isn't whether you want to help your brother. It's whether helping has to mean handing your parents the power they've always had over you. Something shifted in my chest. I had spent my entire life believing those two things were the same. Dr. Miller asked me to talk about Ethan, not the version my parents talked about, but the person he actually was. He's not a bad person, I said. He's just never had to grow up. They've always taken care of everything for him. And you? She asked gently. I was paying for my own clothes at 16, I said. They pushed me to be independent because they said I was a burden. She let that sit. That's a double standard, she said finally. And it's okay to name it. I left the session with homework, something I hadn't had in years. Before you respond, Dr. Miller told me, write down exactly what you are willing to offer, and just as importantly, what you are not. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and a notebook beside it. Daniel made dinner quietly, giving me space. I wrote 2 lists. What I am willing to do: help Ethan understand his medical options, research hospital payment plans, assist with applications for financial aid. What I am not willing to do: hand money directly to my parents, accept blame or guilt, re-enter the role they assigned me. Seeing it written down felt strange, almost rebellious. I opened a new email and typed my father's address. Then I stared at the blank screen for 10 minutes. The first draft came out angry. You only call me when you need something. I deleted it. The second draft sounded apologetic. I'm sorry, I can't do more. I deleted that too. The third version was harder, cleaner, calmer. I wrote, I understand Ethan needs surgery, and I want to help him get the care he needs. I'm not comfortable giving money directly, but I'm willing to help Ethan research hospital financial assistance programs and payment plans. I can also help him apply for any resources he qualifies for. Let me know if this is something he'd like help with. No explanations, no justifications, no begging to be understood. I read it over and over, waiting for the guilt to hit. It did, but it didn't control me. I saved it as a draft and went to bed. The next morning, I reread the email with fresh eyes. It still felt right. Daniel leaned over my shoulder. It's clear, he said, and it's kind. Do you think they'll hate it? I asked. He smiled sadly. I think they'll hate that they can't control it. I hit send before I could change my mind. The reply didn't come right away. Instead, my phone rang the next afternoon while I was at work. My mother's name lit up the screen. My stomach dropped. I answered anyway. She didn't waste time. I can't believe you, she said coldly. After everything we did for you. I closed my eyes. I offered to help, I said. Just not in the way you want. That's not real help, she snapped. Real help is trusting your family. Trust. From the woman who taught me to apologize for breathing too loudly. She started listing my childhood failures like a report card. Times I disappointed them, opportunities I wasted, ways I'd always been difficult. I felt myself shrinking, my voice getting quieter. Then she said something that made my hands go numb. You don't even have kids, she said. You have money to spare, unlike us. Something in me snapped, not loudly, but completely. I'm done, I said, my voice shaking but firm. I'm done being blamed. I'll help Ethan directly if he wants it. I won't be controlled anymore. She hung up. I stood in the bathroom at work afterward, gripping the sink, breathing through the adrenaline. I hadn't been perfect. But I had been honest, and for the first time, I knew exactly where I stood. The silence afterward was louder than any argument we'd ever had. Days passed without a call, a message, or even an angry voicemail. I checked my phone more often than I wanted to admit, half expecting another demand, half dreading it. Nothing came. At first, the quiet made me anxious. I kept waiting for the punishment from my parents to show up somehow, to remind me that I didn't get to walk away so easily. That had always been the pattern. Confrontation followed by pressure, pressure followed by guilt. But this time, there was only absence. Daniel noticed it before I did. They're not reaching out, he said one evening as we sat on the couch. My cat curled up between us. How does that feel? I thought about it. It hurts, I said finally. But it also explains a lot. Because if they truly cared about me, about my life, my feelings, my well-being, they would have followed up. They would have asked how I was holding up. They would have tried to understand why I said no. Instead, they disappeared the moment I stopped being useful. That realization settled into me slowly, like something heavy finding its place. A week later, I drafted a separate email to Ethan. I stared at the blank screen for a long time before typing. I didn't want to drag him into the conflict or make him feel like he had to choose sides. So I kept it simple. I heard about the surgery. I hope you're okay. If you want help looking into hospital payment plans or financial assistance, I'm willing to help you directly. No pressure. I read it twice, then hit send. 3 days passed before he replied. Thanks. Our parents found another solution. I appreciate the offer though. That was it. No explanation, no details. I felt a strange mix of relief and guilt wash over me. Relief that I wasn't being pulled back in. Guilt that some part of me still wondered if I should have done more. Dr. Miller helped me unpack that feeling in our next session. You were taught that your worth was measured by how much you gave up, she said. It makes sense that stepping out of that role feels uncomfortable. At work, life kept moving. I was assigned to lead a mid-size project, nothing flashy but important. For the first time, my manager trusted me to make decisions without double-checking everything. You've been consistent, he said. You don't panic when things get hard. I almost laughed at that. Panic had been my entire childhood. That Friday, a few coworkers invited me out for drinks to celebrate finishing a deadline early. I hesitated, old instincts telling me not to take up space, not to assume I belonged. Daniel squeezed my hand. You're allowed to be seen, he said softly. I went. No one waited for me to mess up. No one joked about how long my success would last. They just talked about work, movies, weekend plans, normal. That word started to mean something different to me. A month passed without any contact from my parents. Then my mother's birthday came. My phone lit up with a reminder I'd set years ago, one I'd never questioned before. I stared at it for a long time. Every year, no matter how distant we were, I called her. Even when she barely acknowledged my own birthday. Even when the conversation felt like an obligation I had to survive. This year, I didn't. The guilt came fast and sharp, but it didn't stay. Because for the first time, I noticed something else. She hadn't called me on my birthday either. Not even to check how I was holding up. The silence went both ways. I spent that evening cooking dinner with Daniel, music playing softly in the background. Nothing dramatic happened. No disaster followed my choice. The world didn't collapse. In therapy, Dr. Miller pointed that out gently. Setting boundaries often reveals the truth of a relationship, she said. Not the relationship we wish we had, but the one that actually exists. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since college. I wrote down moments from my childhood, the accusations, the jokes that weren't jokes, the way everything wrong somehow led back to me. Seeing it all in one place made something click. It wasn't that I was bad luck. It was that my parents needed someone to blame so they wouldn't have to look at themselves. Without me there, the cracks in their lives had nowhere else to go. One evening, as Daniel and I washed dishes side by side, he broke the comfortable silence. Do you ever think they'll change? He asked carefully. I considered the question. I don't need them to anymore, I said. And I meant it. I had friends who checked on me because they wanted to, colleagues who valued my work, a partner who didn't treat love like something conditional. I was building something solid, something that didn't depend on proving I wasn't cursed. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for things to fall apart. I was planning for them to keep going. And somewhere in that quiet, steady stretch of normal life, I realized something that felt almost unbelievable. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. The message came from an unfamiliar number on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Hey, it's Ethan. I'm going to be in Chicago next week for a follow-up appointment. Do you want to grab coffee? I stared at my phone longer than I probably should have. My first reaction surprised me, not anger, not excitement, but anxiety. A tight, familiar knot formed in my stomach, the same one I used to feel before family dinners or phone calls that never ended well. I hadn't seen my brother in years. Not really. Holiday photos didn't count. Neither did the brief updates filtered through our parents. I typed a reply, erased it, typed another. Sure. We can meet near the hospital, somewhere public. He sent back a thumbs-up emoji and a time. That week crawled by. I kept wondering why he wanted to see me now. To ask for money? To pass along another message from our parents? Or maybe just out of obligation. On the day of the meeting, I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a small table near the window. My hands wrapped tightly around my coffee cup, even though it was still too hot to drink. When Ethan walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked healthier than the last time I'd seen him, less tense, less defensive. He'd gained some weight. His shoulders weren't hunched like he was bracing for impact. "Hey," he said awkwardly. "Hey," I replied. We sat down, and for the first few minutes the conversation stayed safely shallow. Work, the city, his recovery. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Better," he said. "Still tired, but clearer, somehow." I nodded, unsure where this was going. Then he set his cup down and looked directly at me. "I've been thinking a lot," he said. "About us. About growing up." I didn't interrupt. He took a breath. "I didn't see it before. Or maybe I didn't want to." I felt my chest tighten, but I stayed quiet. "Our parents freaked out when I needed surgery," he continued. "Not because they were worried about me, but because they didn't know how to handle it. They panicked, blamed everyone. Even you." I let out a slow breath. "That wasn't new," I said carefully. "I know," he replied. "That's the part I'm struggling with." He rubbed his hands together, a nervous habit I remembered from childhood. "I was always the one they leaned on," he said. "The one they expected things from, but also the one they protected. When things went wrong, it somehow never stuck to me." I waited. "I went along with it," he admitted. "Calling you Jinx, laughing, letting them treat you like the problem." The word sorry didn't come, but something close to it did. "I think I was afraid," he said. "If I questioned them, maybe I'd lose what I had." I believed him. "Watching them fall apart over my medical bills," he continued, "made me realize something. They're not good at taking care of anyone. They just need control. Someone to manage. Someone to blame." We sat in silence for a moment. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he added. "I just wanted you to know I see it now." That was when I felt it, the shift. Not closure, not healing, but recognition. "I don't need an apology," I said. "I needed you to stop pretending it didn't happen." He nodded, eyes fixed on the table. "I'm trying," he said quietly. We talked longer than I expected about college, about the years he spent back at home, about how stuck he'd felt without admitting it to himself. He told me he was applying for jobs now, real ones, that he was thinking about moving out. "They hate the idea," he said with a small, humorless smile. "They keep telling me I'm not ready." I recognized that line immediately. "They need someone to depend on them," I said. "Or someone to depend on." "Yeah," he said. "I think you leaving messed up the system." I smiled slightly. "Good." When we stood to leave, there was no hug, just a pause, then an awkward half-smile. "I'm glad you came," he said. "So am I replied. After he left, I stayed seated for a few minutes, staring out the window. I didn't feel elated, I didn't feel healed, but I felt lighter. That evening, I called Dr. Miller and told her about the meeting. "Sometimes," she said, "being believed by even one person can change how heavy the past feels." She asked how I felt about staying in touch with him. "Cautiously hopeful," I said, "but not desperate." That night, Daniel listened as I told him everything. He didn't interrupt, just held my hand and let me finish. "You don't owe him a relationship," he said gently, "but you're allowed to want one." I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because everything was resolved, but because I finally understood something important. I didn't need my family to rewrite the past. I just needed to stop carrying it alone. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after that, but it became mine. Work grew busier in a good way. I was assigned to lead a major project bigger than anything I'd handled before. For a moment, that old voice crept in, whispering that something would go wrong, that success never lasted for people like me. Then I recognized the voice. It wasn't mine. I finished the project on time. The client loved it. My manager shook my hand and told me he trusted my judgment. I let myself believe him instead of waiting for the other shoe to drop. That night, Daniel cooked dinner, and we ate at the small kitchen table we'd been talking about replacing for years. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. I didn't argue. I didn't deflect. I let the words land. A few weeks later, I wrote a letter to my parents. Not to accuse them, not to beg for understanding, just to be clear. I told them I was open to contact if they could respect me as an adult with boundaries. That I would no longer accept blame, guilt, or manipulation. That my life was no longer available as an explanation for their unhappiness. I mailed the letter and didn't wait by the door for a response. None came. And strangely, that felt like an answer. Ethan and I stayed in touch carefully. He told me he'd accepted a job offer and was looking for his own apartment. Our conversations were short, honest, and free of the past unless we chose to acknowledge it. That was enough. One quiet Tuesday evening, Daniel and I were washing dishes together when he turned off the water and faced me. "I don't want to wait for the perfect moment," he said. "Our life already feels right." He knelt down, nervous and smiling, and asked me to marry him. I didn't think about bad luck. I didn't hesitate. I said yes. We planned a small wedding. Friends who showed up because they wanted to. A family built by choice, not obligation. On the morning I addressed the invitations, I realized something that stopped me mid-sentence. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of success. Not of happiness. Not of being seen. For years, my parents said I brought bad luck with me everywhere I went. They said things fell apart because of me. But when I left, nothing collapsed. Instead, my life began to grow. I didn't take luck away from them. I took back my voice, my worth, my future. And that turned out to be the best thing I ever did. Final takeaway. Being called bad luck doesn't make you cursed. It often means you were carrying other people's failures so they wouldn't have to face them. Walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes, it's the first honest step toward a life that finally fits.